There was a knock on my door and I immediately went to open it, even though it was 3 a.m. I thought I knew who was there. We had a difficult relationship with a girl. So complicated that many times we parted with the words forever, and then we came together again with promises never to quarrel again. Jealous people met, so we had an overly emotional relationship. It was only in the afternoon that Natasha packed up and moved out of my place. And there's a knock on the door. Of course, I thought she'd been doing her head half the night. I realized that I loved her and returned. I was ready to forget everything and make peace. I have already taken up the key, made one turn. And then there was another knock. Strange, unfamiliar. The hand is too light. It's not Natasha. I let go of the key and asked, "Who's there?" The one standing outside the door answered only with heavy breathing. I repeated the question and again there was silence, only hoarse sighs, as if in agony. Is it bad for someone, can't they say, I thought, and looked through the peephole, and it was dark there. They closed it so I couldn't see who was standing there, so they're deliberately scaring you. But I wasn't the timid type. My adrenaline immediately jumped. His fists were heavy with anger. I'd like to open it and hit him on the forehead. Yes, it's better to control yourself than to be responsible for a fight in the entrance. You have a minute to leave, or I'll come out and see you off, I said, and they heard me. The legs shuffled, and the agonal breathing receded. I was dying to sleep. I was exhausted from fighting during the day. I went to bed and fell asleep, and in the morning I didn't even remember until I went out to the entrance. My peephole was not just covered with a hand, it was covered with a lump of clay earth. That bastard, he shouldn't have come out and hurt his neck. I regretted washing the door. Our house was old. The people lived there were different. Some had been consuming alcohol and other substances for many years, mentally degraded and turned into walking sick organisms, but I didn't have any problems with them before. They walked around the house without touching anyone, and sometimes they slept in the bushes near the entrance, and now they covered the peephole with earth. It needs to be thought out. I promised them in absentia that they would run into me next time. And the very next night there was another knock on my door. Although it wasn't even a sound, it was picking. It was like someone was clawing at the lock and trying to pull it out. The peephole was sealed up again. I got angry, but I tried not to get excited. It's still not clear who's behind the door and what's on his mind. He scratches and breathes hoarsely. It took me a moment to notice that I was chewing on my lower lip. Fear still permeated me. It's reckless to open the door without seeing who's there. I hit the door with my fist so that the stuff they had put over my peephole would crumble. I did it. A light appeared in the round hole. The glass remained dirty, and it was impossible to see the face of the one who was standing in the entrance, but this allowed us to assess the degree of threat. The man was thin and short, stood unsteadily on his feet, could not even hold his head straight. I took a mop from the bathroom. I didn't want to touch such complete personalities with my hands. Suddenly he will start biting and scratching, infect with something else. They're all with bouquets. Cursing, I turned the lock and pushed the handle hard. I wanted this bastard to be blown away by the door and then add a mop, but my fingers went limp when I saw him. The one in front of me couldn't be alive. A dehydrated body, an eyeless, naked man. The skin is like polished copper, red and glossy. There is not a single hair on the whole body, not a single pore on the face. His entire flesh seemed to be a solid scar from burns. This is what a man would look like if he was doused with gasoline and set on fire, but he survived. He survived completely in vain, because he is now a living pain. The man breathed with his mouth open, felt the wall, tried to cling to the air, wrinkled his nose, moved his ears. I tried to compensate for my blindness as best I could. You'll see this once and you'll stop feeling sorry for yourself forever. I imagined his agony and felt it almost physically. He locked himself in the apartment so as not to see the squalid. And he blinked my peephole. He was really capable of scaring any adult. One might think that this is not a man at all, but some kind of ghoul. Who does he live with? Who lets him go for a walk at night? I thought about it. It was the first morning I woke up with thoughts other than my ex-girlfriend. The night knocks, the sick breathing, and the very image of the blind man stuck in my memory. I experienced a serious nervous shock. I should have told someone and asked about it. The neighbors might have known more than me. The staircases in our house were long. There are 10 apartments on one floor. That blind man couldn't have crossed only to me, probably bothered others too. Vanya's apartment was on the floor with me. We communicated well, we were almost friends. I called him for coffee and told him what I had heard and seen at night. Vanya did not finish listening and interrupted me. Yes, I almost piled into my underpants myself when I saw one of these dry-roofed ones. Have they been scratching at you too? That's how they walk around here at night. Wait, what did you say, dry-roofed? Well, 2 nights ago I opened the door and it came right into my apartment. That's right, the tongue does not turn to say the face. Erysipelas. And for some reason they said there are so many of them they got wound up like rats. They walk at night scratching at the door. Don't you know that at all? We discussed it with the whole house yesterday. Let's go outside, I'll show you something. That house was long. We walked for a long time. I didn't have enough patience. I asked what Vanya wanted to show, and he replied, just wait and see. There was a solid wall around the corner of the house, no windows on the other side. There were 3 portable fences on high legs, but it turned out that the earth had collapsed there and a large deep hole had formed near the wall. It's a disaster, but it's not surprising. There's a dam nearby. There are always some problems with the soil in the spring. Then the river will overflow. Then the shore will crumble. Vanya looked at me and sniffed with a red nose, kneaded his cold fingers. What's that got to do with it? I waited for an explanation. They got out of there, the neighbor said. Only the earth collapsed and dry roads appeared. There are dirty footprints in the entrance. They cover our eyes with clay. Is it logical? Discouraged by what I had heard, I still hoped for a reasonable answer. How could people, and even such helpless blind people, live underground? Vanya looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, what makes me think that these are people? What makes me think they're alive? Yes, it hurts me to think about who they are. The most important thing is what to do about it. Did you say the whole house discussed it? Well, who was informed? I asked. Nobody. We agreed to be silent. Don't tell anyone either, Vanya asked. What he surprised me. There's a blind dead man walking around the house, and we need to be silent. My neighbor wasn't joking. Dead meat. Wait. Should we be silent? My neighbor wasn't joking. You didn't live here 4 years ago and you don't know how we fought for our house. And your great-grandmother fought too. If it wasn't for her, she would have given you an apartment, not here yet, but in a house made of sandwich panels. Have you seen them? They set it up across the river. They have been standing recently and are already falling apart. It was built for us, and they wanted to move it there. We defended our house, but the bureaucrats just give us a reason. They will declare it an emergency and demolish it. Compared to what we've been through, these dry roads are nothing. This is our problem, and we will solve it ourselves. In the meantime, the main thing is to keep the doors closed, especially at night. We'll deal with them. I promised to trust them and forget about it for a while. I don't know how they were going to figure it out. Those people had never encountered anything like this before. They only knew that there were more than 5 blind weirdos. They appear at night and scratch into the same apartments on the ground floor. It's bad luck that it's in mine too, but I was willing to be patient. They were scary, but they seemed weak and not evil. Why be afraid of them? That's what I thought until they showed what they were capable of. The tapping and clanking of nails started again late at night. I woke up, made an irritated noise and pulled the blanket over my ears, but after a couple of minutes it became impossible to ignore it. Judging by the sounds, my door was not just scratched, but torn apart. They opened it like a can with a can opener, tore off pieces. I hoped that this was not the case. I thought that the long corridor worked like a megaphone and amplified sounds, and it was still scary. Natasha still threw me in time and did not catch this blind man breathing heavily and digging my door. It seemed that it would break a little more. It went on for an hour, and when I couldn't take it anymore, it stopped. I knew that the blind man had left, but I was afraid to open the door until it was time to leave the apartment. What did I see this morning? The torn canvas, deep grooves with notches and bite marks on the steel sheets. My door was flimsy Chinese, but it was hardly possible to open it without tools. I almost had a hole through the door. The last layer remained. I should have ignored that. Vanya's door was stronger, but the handle was torn out there too. One apartment was finally broken into. The old plywood door was broken into pieces. When the 3 eyeless men entered, a married couple with a child escaped to the street through a window. The creepy trio groped around the rooms. They grabbed and turned things over, and then they found a linen closet and stole some clothes. That wasn't all that happened that night. There was a grandfather. I don't remember his name, by his patronymic Yurievich. He was strong, healthy, and covered in blue trousers. He probably sat there more than once. They also broke down the doors at night, but did not immediately tell him what happened at his house. He yelled at Vanya and me to stay out of his business. However, then he changed his mind, called us himself, and laid out everything as in spirit. When one of the eyeless ones got into Yurievich, he was not afraid. The grandfather grabbed a stool and began to bludgeon the uninvited guest. He walked away so much that the stool broke and the blind man hit the floor and died. He stopped breathing and moving. Grandfather didn't know what to do. It doesn't seem like he killed a man, but the devil knows what will happen for it. He dragged the dead man into the room and thought about what to do with him. And he lay down and came to life. He inhaled noisily, twitched, cracking his joints, adjusted his dislocated shoulders, got up and just left. Yuri called it satanic lawlessness, and I agreed with him. The immortal blind men got out of the ground. What is this all about? I would like to know at least approximately what we are dealing with. I knew someone who could help us. I have a friend, Ekaterina Guskova. She studies at the Faculty of History and is engaged in genealogy. He works with archives, searches for information about ancestors, searches for forgotten graves and burial sites. I wrote to her. I didn't tell her everything right away. I just asked if she could look in the archives for something about the place where I live. Terina immediately replied that she had been interested in this house before, but nothing was known about it. This building has a strange history. It was a working barracks, which was later rebuilt as an apartment building. No one can say what they were doing there before. The documents were kept classified and they have not been preserved. My friend was meticulous. I immediately realized that I wasn't just asking. I had to tell her that the ground had crumbled near the house, and now she had already arrived. She was so curious. Just by looking at the pit, she said that this place was a mass grave. I don't know by what sign she identified it. For me, it was just a deep hole. My friend hooked a safety rope to a nearby pole and climbed down. I was worried, but she got up after a few minutes and showed me a piece of rusty chain. The dead are not chained up. Due to the lack of information, my imagination began to fill in the blanks. The former barracks, immoral science, the search for immortality, victims of inhuman experiments, attempts to destroy their own creations, blind, burn, bury alive. I shuddered from my thoughts. I wanted to shake out of my head what we did not know. The truth was approaching night. Many doors were already broken. I had to decide what to do. The experience of our old neighbor has shown that they can be temporarily immobilized. Residents of the affected apartments armed themselves with the heaviest that they found. Vanya took an axe, and I took out a crowbar. I was surprised that everyone was on standby and could help if necessary. It got dark. My neighbors were on duty both at the entrance and on the street. There was a tense wait. I was sitting in my apartment with the door locked, although the last sheet could have been pierced with a finger. There was a commotion and shouting, and where did my adrenaline rush go in moments of danger? It was only my duty to the other tenants that made me leave. The blind people are trapped. It turned out that there were several loose boards in the dead end of the corridor. Eyeless people were crawling out from under the floor. Some of them were naked and somehow in stolen items. They were all dry, burned. Some had no nose or ears. The hallway was crowded. The neighbors beat them without an eye and fell before they could straighten their backs. I didn't even have time to help when everyone was stunned and piled on top of each other like a pig. None of them moved or breathed. That's where the eyeless ones made their nest and hid during the day. There were 8 of them in total. The neighbors hurriedly decided what to do with them, while again cement, crushed stone. I also participated. He was carrying buckets of sand. We've been concreting the old well all night. This action made me feel unwell. I got involved in who knows what. And now he had a bad secret. I don't know who those blind people were. Which was still a bad secret. I don't know who those blind people were. Maybe they couldn't be considered human, but they seemed terribly unhappy. They've been underground for dozens, maybe even 100 years. They must have felt something. Maybe they were cold, so they wanted to get dressed, and we buried them under layers of concrete. Natasha wanted to make peace, but I said it was better for her not to come back to me. There are no forces left for a passionate relationship. I didn't sleep well at night, and one night I heard someone scratching, but not in the door anymore, but from somewhere below. Someone was quietly rustling under the floor, and so it goes night after night. My neighbors and I greeted each other, but we didn't talk. I didn't know if I was the only one hearing it or if they were too. Every night it gets closer and closer, louder. The sounds were quiet, like mice gnawing on something, and then like the cracking of stones. It's strange that I'm almost used to the noise under the floor. I thought it would always be like this now. I didn't listen to my inner voice. I didn't listen to my friend Katerina, who advised me to leave there. I had a lot of problems, and besides, I was still not well on nervous grounds. Where is there to think about moving? It was the last night in that house. I was lying in a heavy sleep, alone with my illness. They scratched and scratched from below, gnashing their teeth. I thought I heard hoarse breathing. My arm was hanging off the bed, and I felt it blow through the floorboards. And then the boards cracked. Cement dust rose into the air, and a blind evil man climbed into my room through the floor. He was roaring and waving his arms. The nails bit into my leg and tore off the skin. Wrapped in a blanket, I ran out of my apartment through the window. The blind man managed to get out only halfway, otherwise he would not have let me go, and I would not have been able to cope with him. I have no doubt about that. It wasn't just in my apartment that night. The buried ones chewed through the concrete, found themselves under the floor, and even being blind, were able to find all the apartments where they had rushed before, where they were rushing to before. They broke into Vanya, to the former criminal Yurik, and to the rest of the neighbors. And no one was able to defend themselves. The blind became angrier and showed their bestial strength. All my neighbors were torn apart. Literally. I was taken to the morgue for identification. The old man had no face. His body was gnawed to the bone. Only the arms and legs survived, and I only recognized him by the blue tattoos. Then they showed me the refrigerator where Vanya was lying, or rather his head, neck, a piece of his right shoulder and arm. Only some parts of the other neighbors also remained. I never went back to that house. They wouldn't even let me in there. Now it's a closed area. The survivors were relocated. I now live in one of the cheap new buildings made of sandwich panels. They say that those dry-roofed people still live in that house. They settled in our apartments instead of us. I don't know why the blind were so eager to get into these apartments. Maybe they used to own them. I don't know. And I don't want to know, I just want to forget. But it's not working out yet.